understand various issues surrounding cure, and then see what kind of challenges we have to face subsequently. Most of us know, earlier we used to talk of max cohort. We said 11 years would be required after entry of HIV into body to develop AIDS, 1.5 years to die if you don't provide any intervention. And naturally what happened, we had communication campaigns in the initial era which actually talked of premature death as a factor. The result was, most of these people, perhaps today, when you speak with those who are infected, you suddenly realize when you tell them that they are likely to have normal life, they could survive perhaps another 45 years without any kind of fear if they take ART regularly, they don't trust this. One of the reasons is the negative campaign, and then even if they start believing, certain questions come to their mind. One is, I need to perhaps, I need to worry mainly because I might transmit HIV to my near and dear ones. Every drug, excepting those of Ayush, have toxicity, and therefore some kind of toxicity will hit me. They emphasize the issue of taking it on time without break, and fear of forgetting tends to bother them. I need to take these medicines for lifetime. That's an issue which is a major botheration. And therefore, most of them, they start thinking, will there be a cure in near future? Why worry about cure? One of the things which we need to know is, despite the fact that it is a chronic manageable illness, the worst fear that most of those infected will have is about premature death and aging, drug toxicities, and chronic morbidities that may give rise to bumps, or those like malignancies which might kill them. Heart has enhanced survival, but there are certain things which we need to remember. Heart does not kill infected cells. The immune system should eliminate these infected cells, but they persist in long-lived cells, and HIV DNA tends to survive as long as the cell survives. 9% of our human genome is made up of old integrated retrovirus. So there is a fear, perhaps the cure may not ever come. But at the same time, we saw in the recent past, we had many cure claims that tended to come, but they were immediately followed in a couple of months' time with reversals. That cure was not a true cure. And then we need to start thinking now, when we know reversals have occurred, what would be the fate? What are the challenges that I might face in HIV cure research? In 1997, people first found out that the HIV tends to stay into certain resting, latently infected CD4 memory cells, and these can last lifetime. HIV that way is a unique virus. Neutralizing antibody and CTL responses are actually important. They don't lead to effective control of this particular infection. When Bob Silicano and David Ho started looking at what would happen if we give ART for a long period of time, they thought that you would require 60 years of ART if you have to suppress this virus completely, which is something which was perhaps thought as undesirable at that point in time, given the fact that the toxicities of the drug were pretty high. How does this happen? This virus tends to go for banking. The virus banks on its own survival, its survival instincts that it has, and deposits itself in reservoirs, and it has an ability that is much needed for multiplication, for survival. And it tends to react very fast to the inflammatory realities, as was shown by Dr. Chaudhary, and many inflammatory triggers help it tide over this particular survival crisis. Now we need to look at where this virus tends to survive. It stays into host cells, CD4 memory cell, the stem cells, macrophage, glial cells, and in certain organs like lymph nodes, gut, the CNS, and testes and ovaries. How are these viruses in these reservoirs? Not all of them are replication competent. It's only about 12% which are replication competent. Rest of them perhaps don't have that potential to replicate. So it is this 12% that we really need to worry about. Actually, if you actually look at this particular virus, this virus lives in a very hostile environment. It is surrounded by contraceptive like deacetylated histones. UN sanctions, the term that we are now used to most often, that leads to limited supplies for required transcription and elongation factors. The biological warfare based on methylation of DNA leads to paralysis of transcription. There is a chemical attack that they fear of miRNA leading to inability to translate into replication. We studied, in one of our studies, we found that miRNA 29A levels were inversely correlated with replication as such. But still, in these viruses, there is a lone wolf. And this lone wolf is perhaps smart, unpredictable, unidentifiable, and has a usual power to replicate at a very fast or rapid pace. It defies the ability to find a breach that could occur and has a very high competence to replicate. The secret of cure is in the reservoirs. Either you keep them latent forever, for which you know that one of the approaches is gene therapy or therapeutic vaccines, or you force them to replicate, to sterilize them through ARVs, and that is kick and kill kind of strategy, or you make them produce incompetent viruses for survival, and those could also be possible through other known strategies. How did we know all about this? The learnings came particularly from LTNP studies. The non-progressors tend to have certain differences which were identified. People started understanding how long-term non-progression or what elite controllers tend to have, and they are being used different ways in different approaches as such, because people looked at why are these people not progressing. One of the worries is about the reservoir size. These reservoirs tend to get established very early in HIV infection, and one needs to worry, you may have to time certain interventions at the very early stage of HIV infection to reduce these reservoirs, which is going to be a key challenge. Timing of heart initiation would suddenly become important. You could perhaps, if you time it well, you may be able to even preserve immune functions as such, reduce gut-associated lymphoid tissue damage, and if you actually think in terms of using such a strategy, one of the major challenges is to actually find out somebody who could be recently infected, which is likely to be a major challenge in public health strategies. One of the issues is, unless ART is initiated early, majority of these escape mutants actually will arrive, and they will pose challenges to us. It will render these infected cells as insensitive to CTL immune responses that are directed against common epitopes. When people looked at early HIV treatment, ARV that was started in acute or early HIV infection, one of the things which was a major objective was, can this lead to better immune function? Would it lead to lower viral load set point? When they tried doing that, the success was not as much as we thought. The only thing that we knew is perhaps the reservoir size becomes smaller, but even that is contestable for one reason, that we do not know. Better methods need to be there for actually estimating reservoir size as such. And those issues where reservoir sizes are measured, you see different types of tests. However, none of these tests are reckoned as one which are highly sensitive in terms of estimating these reservoir sizes. People thought that we could go for heart intensification, and this could lead to suppression of residual viral replication, but did it happen when people tried this with raltegravir intensification? They found that this doesn't remain beneficial. Then people thought of making HIV actively replicate while they are in the reservoirs. They use HDAC inhibitors. And when they did that, the strategy was to purge these reservoirs. But if you actually look at the list, you will find majority of these strategies have failed so far. So the challenge of reactivating this virus when it is in a latent stage continues to be there even today. One of the ways could be, why should we not go for permanent method of sterilization, the one that is acceptable as a true Indian response here, and perhaps neutralize this particular virus. You could do that using broadly neutralizing antibodies, but recent data tends to say even this effort is not successful as of now. Or you could perhaps try to silence the power of this virus to replicate using gene therapy and trying to see whether this virus could be permanently kept in a latent phase. Some studies still continue to be ongoing, but the only promising thing that is currently in horizon is CRISPR-Cas9 strategy. Therapeutic vaccines is another approach that perhaps needs to be understood. Therapeutic vaccines could be useful to ensure that the immune system will continue to respond to HIV in absence of antiretroviral drugs, or even in the presence, to ensure that the virus doesn't replicate as such. There are different approaches that are being used. One of the approach, which perhaps you must have had read recently, is one that targeted towards T-cell activation, and that appears to be one which is little successful as of report. This recent British claim of the cure, they used a combination approach, urinostat as anti-latency agent, therapeutic vaccine to ensure that activated T cells are affected. Activated T cells are important because they can stimulate this virus to replicate through different molecular mechanisms and provision of ART. One of the things which is constant worry is, like in vaccines, suddenly we have lowered our standards. Vaccine trials that you generally see, you have two types of cure. One is sterilizing cure, the second is a functional cure. In functional cure, the virus will be there, but its replication is affected through different interventions that you can provide. Sterilizing cure is something which is a complete cure, is perhaps not being contemplated or not being talked of as much today. The reason why we have two different criteria is if you need to think as to what kind of criteria are required for cure. Your plasma viral load needs to be undetectable, undetectable pro-viral DNA PCR on ART for at least 2 occasions in last 6 months, integrated DNA reduction as a proxy of HIV reservoirs. However, there are no robust biomarkers for cure. We cannot predict cure as of now. One needs to stop ART and watch for this virus to return back, and that's slightly a risky proposition when you think in terms of conducting these kinds of trials. Can we do this in India? We tend to have multiple claims. All Ayush practitioners, most often they come with a claim that we can cure HIV, but do we have a facility? At NARI, we have developed one of the approaches. We do pro-viral DNA, and then we have developed a ex vivo latency model where we stimulate these viruses to replicate. We try to put these viruses of cure claims and try and see whether there is a cure possible. In conclusion, 30 years of intense research effort, they have reduced new HIV infections, enhanced survival and quality of life, and now they have led to an aspirational goal of cure. The challenges continue to exist on size of estimation of size of reservoirs, and perhaps if we have to test this, we may have to do this without switching off the ART. We may not be close to the cure, but we are closer to realize a dream of a potential cure. Thank you.